Hello and welcome. We are pleased that you've joined us for today's session, Be a Data-Driven Organization. Before we get started, I want to share our big news that Moss Adams and Baker Tilly have joined forces to redefine accounting, tax, and advisory services for the middle market. It's really exciting, and you can read more about it on our website from the link in your console. And now I'm going to play our housekeeping video.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our webcasts are designed to help elevate your business performance. Transform your future for the better with advisory solutions tailored to your vision and supported by our collective technical resources. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
All right, we have two presenters with us today. We have Fike, Director, and Jessica Carius, Manager. If you have questions for either of our presenters during today's presentation, please submit them through the Q&A window. This is a short webcast, so if we don't have time to get to yours, we will follow up with you afterwards. And now I would like to turn the floor over to Jessica to get us started.
Awesome. All right, thanks for joining us today. Just to kick us off, I did want to just take a couple of minutes here to level set today's session. So this MCP webcast series is centered on the foundations required to reap the benefits of generative AI. And the context in which we talk about these themes, so from business value last month to data today, to technology solutions and people in the coming months. All of this is applicable regardless of what stage in your generative AI journey you and your business are at. So whether you're just starting to dabble with ChatGPT or Claude, or you're starting to implement these full-scaled solutions, the way in which you should approach generative AI across all of these foundations should consistently be applied. So today we are focusing on the data component and specifically how generative AI has provided this awesome opportunity to make insights from all kinds of data more accessible than ever. On the flip side too, we're also going to touch on how important it is to clean your data for generative AI. And I say this in the context of prompts, right? You probably have all heard of garbage in, garbage out. And the same really does just apply for how we use these technologies. So we're completely rethinking our definitions and our approach to data in this context. Now, when we talk about AI, in general, it can be defined as computer systems designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. So I think tasks that are like speaking or reading or predicting, and now even creating. So these creating models are what's referred to as large language models. And these are what are trained on vast amounts of data that is unstructured. So data like text, images, videos, sound, all of this giving these models the ability to generate, predict, or in other words, create novel content. And while it is amazing and there's so much potential, generative AI isn't magic, right? We can think of it as the latest evolution in our AI toolkit, per se. And like every AI tool before, it's completely dependent on data, not just in how it's trained, but also in how we use it. So generative AI combines all these traditional AI techniques into one powerful model. And the difference now is that we can actually have conversations with that data in natural language. But here's what people miss, is that the way you interact with generative AI, like I said, your prompts and your questions, that's also data. So we need to really think about how we're using these tools, and it's so important to be thoughtful about the context that we're providing when we use it as well. When we think about data in a business context, we understand the power and the benefits of having good, reliable data, right? It informs strategy, it helps us set goals as businesses, it enables us to understand our customers. The more data you have, it's easy to believe the more insights you have and the more powerful and better your organization will be. However, that's where organizations do get stuck, is in that way of thinking. They think that data-driven means being more, well, rather means having more access to data, means having cleaner dashboards, means having more access for people, and that's just simply not really it. Being data-driven is actually about this communication layer. So on this slide here, you'll see a circle, and inside is this triangle, and this triangle is this communication layer. So you can define a plan, you can execute a plan, and you can get the right people involved, but getting the right information to the right people at the right time, that's what actually drives success. That's what being a data-driven organization means. So it comes down to this process and where there's friction in that communication process. We can take an example here of a sales team, and the sales team wants to understand why deals are stalling, why we're losing sales, and they ask their data team to pull insights together. Data team then goes to 3 different dashboards, pulls reports from different systems, puts it all together, gets it back to the sales team, and by the time that's all done, more deals have been lost and we're constantly just moving on. So it can feel like you're always one step behind. That's where there's friction, is when you need to apply technology to fix that friction, to expedite the process and to enhance that communication layer. So this is where generative AI is stepping in and is absolutely changing the ballpark. It's because natural language and the way that we interact with the data has completely changed. So instead of going to a dashboard and relying on data scientists to read a graph or to investigate a pivot table and ask the right questions, accessibility has completely changed, and now everyone can interact with this data in natural language. So we're finding new ways to approach how we interact with insights, and also what can also form these insights. So when we look at data and we think, right, how can we change it at scale? It's important to start small and think incrementally and make those improvements along the way. When we see businesses go wrong, again, it's when they want to do everything. They want all the data, they want to analyze everything, and they don't want to leave any insights untouched. And that's when you start to realize you actually don't need all of it. So we see organizations are spending months, even some years, depending on the scale, fixing a data warehouse. And by the time it's all cleaned, you've left all these insights on the table. So what you really want to do is identify, again, those friction points, find out what questions need to be answered now, and start there while you're starting to clean up in the background. Because we're living in this world now where data is rapidly evolving at a pace and scale that we can't afford to pause to catch up. We need to keep pace while we're keeping up at the same time. So it's shifting that mindset and also using generative AI to think, well, what can I do with the data I have now? what can I do with this unstructured data, with these PDFs, with these texts? Are there data existing in that I can start to use now while I'm cleaning up numbers in the background? So I'll pass to you, Casey, now for the next one. Oh.
Data. And then I think prior to us working with them, it's this first bullet of everything is manual. I have to go into our accounting system to grab this report or this Excel output. I have to go into our CRM and grab this output. And then I'm pulling those together. And part of this is also like, how are we defining the right KPI? So again, kind of aligning on our strategy, which should align to where we want to go as an organization. Again, I think about our data strategy. How are we doing this? How are we driving metrics, source systems? This needs to align to your overall strategic goals. It's not a separate endeavor that, a data team or IT might be running with. But these challenges where in these data projects, again, getting back to Jess's previous slide, where we see these fail is we're trying to get all of the data. That's too much from a change management perspective, from an implementation perspective. It's identifying where do we want to go to as an organization? How are we measuring our progress against those goals? And again, I think further to build these, some of you may have run into this on your calls where we start these data projects and they lose steam because of what we've been talking about, where we're trying to grab everything. The metrics aren't loosely defined, or we've also invested in technology, made significant investments prior to defining those goals, those metrics, those source systems. So it's thinking through, and again, starting with your organizational strategy. Where do we want to go? How are we defining those metrics? How are we pulling that data from our source systems? So here, as we kind of talk about data, which is an extremely broad topic that we could spend hours talking about, the way we think about data with the explosion of generative AI has really changed. I think a couple of years ago, if we were having a webcast talking about data, everybody's mind would go to Excel, or it would go to a database table, which is structured data. It's like I just laid out. Columns, rows, numbers in those rows, maybe text. With generative AI, we've shifted our focus and shifted our thought process about what is data. What these large language models, OpenAIs, Anthropics are really good at is unstructured data. So I think about text, emails, PDFs, everything you're dealing with a lot of unstructured words. That's where these solutions really step up, and we'll talk about in the next slide how we can drive that value using generative AI. But the way we kind of think about it is, and Jess was talking about this earlier, where it's not so much I'm querying or building a dashboard, but I'm having a conversation with my maybe data warehouse, which we have some examples later in the presentation around, driving insights, and then so on and so forth, where the way we are now working with data versus, dashboards, whatever that may be, it's now I can have a conversation with data and drive insight as I would being able to talk to somebody that has an infinite amount of knowledge. So how we kind of think, and this kind of builds on what I was just talking about, but it's, with this kind of the first one, data cleaning. This is that example I was just giving where, trying to build out some intricate pivot table. I can now have a conversation with my data on, tell me these insights, tell me my margin analysis, tell me what's my best performing customer from a revenue perspective. So again, kind of that analysis and cleaning versus I have to now go define a dashboard. I have to identify that source system. I have to pull that data in, make sure it's clean. It's leveraging large language models, generative AI to drive insights. I think that third bullet, that insights piece, that's been extremely crucial and key for me in my day-to-day as a consultant, where I might be looking at a ton of text, reading through all that. There's a diminishing return on that. If I'm going through a 40-page document, and Jess has a really great example about this later in the presentation, I'm going to start strong, right? But I'm going to get bored. I'm going to lose interest, as anybody would. AI, generative AI, is able to find those patterns and things that I might miss as a human, just because that's what it's built to do. And then this last bullet, SQL, structured query language. I don't know how familiar people are with that on the call, but it's kind of that example I was giving about earlier, where I have to go to a database table. I have to pull data out of it. It's code. I'm a CFO. I don't do data engineering. That's not my thing. But now what we can do and what we're doing with generative AI is SQL, we can still have generative AI write that SQL code to pull that data out. But instead, what I can do now is I can have a conversation with that backend database table that we were talking about, where show me the insights for this. How are we measuring against this KPI that we've defined for that? So again, I think when we think about data, the way we need to think about it now is largely expanded, where, with generative AI, unstructured data, but then how do we use that technology to then talk with and gain insight from that structured data? Jess, with that said, I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome. So this slide here is an overview of what I think is an awesome example when it comes to generative AI and rethinking data. So for this, for this use case, we were working with a client who had no intention of really using generative AI, but they were undergoing a bit of an internal audit. And through that audit, it was found that there was this process where individuals were spending weeks and weeks putting together, chronologies of files for compliance reasons. And in doing that, we realized that this was a prime use case for generative AI, not necessarily just because we needed to speed up this process, but because this process in itself was taking time out of the day-to-day work that individuals were doing. It was an add-on to their daily tasks, not a part of their work. And so it was really important to do what we could to expedite this time. So what we did was we utilized a tool that not only extracted text from these documents, but it also enabled us to then use generative AI to apply insights to that text. So what's important here to note is that we didn't just feed generative AI a document and say, go do this job and expect it to be perfect. It took a robust process to go in, identify what information was required in certain documents, and then also apply generative AI to that and use prompting techniques to ensure that we were extracting the right data and the right insights from those documents. So while there was a bit of a process up front, now the rinse and repeat enables us to expedite these thousands of folders going forward to under 2 hours a folder versus 80. So again, a really great example of identifying data as documents and then using data in the context of prompting to extract the insights that you need from it. So really, generative AI is enabling us to identify these frictional processes and speed it up for our teams. And so I do just want to touch on here this idea of training versus context when we're talking about the clean data. On the training side, if we think back to that first slide we were looking at, where it was the large language models trained on text, audio, sounds, videos, that's going to be that training side. And a lot of that is really unstructured data. And that's the side that we don't see as users. On the flip side is that context, and that's where we have control. So in every interaction you have, every prompt that you use, you're implementing your system prompt, your user prompt, also your user memory in some cases where the generative AI platform, I know OpenAI does it, stores your user interactions. And all of that is fed in as context to the model. And so this is why we say that the garbage in, garbage out motto applies really crucially here, is because the better your prompt, the better your output is going to be. The cleaner your data, the more structured that you're providing context to the generative AI model, the better your output is going to be. So that is why it's really important too, if you want to do some research to find out what prompts are working, what style you should implement in your prompting, that works better. So you can actually find some really cool blogs that give some great prompts that have already been designed, and then you can use them for your processes as well. The hard work can already be done. But it is really important to think about this too from a data security standpoint. And we really believe that data security 101 applies to generative AI at its most basic level, because you also need to think about when you're using these models, what are you providing to that website or that vendor? Do you trust it? What happens if your data in this conversation gets leaked? Is it going to be annoying, or is it going to be really damaging to yourself or your business in that context too? If you wouldn't put it on Instagram, maybe don't put it in a generative AI database, right? So really start to use your data security mindset when you're using generative AI, and that'll go a long way. Back to you, Casey.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Your volume's soft again.
I'm talking.
It came back. It's back.
Okay.
It's back.
Okay. We do. Yeah. I don't do hardware. We do software. But so as we kind of talk through this, we're kind of building on what I was talking about earlier, where, this traditional approach, maybe I have what I'll call a data warehouse. And for those on the call that might not be as familiar, data warehouse is a way to store and centralize your data. I might be pulling data from, like I was talking about earlier, our accounting system, our CRM system, pulling data from Facebook for marketing on Facebook. It's a way to store everything. And that's kind of that first bullet there. We're connecting all of our data. We now have it flowing into a dashboard. We're sharing that link, sending via email. Maybe it gets looked at, maybe it doesn't. And then somebody's having to interpret that dashboard or that visualization to understand, what is this thing trying to tell me? So I think, a lot of us might be there, a lot of us might not be there. But kind of with the advent of Gen AI, what we can now shift to is that same approach of having our data connected in a data warehouse, but now layering a generative AI solution on top of that, where, hey, I'm seeing this in this metric. Tell me more about it. What are those underperforming customers? What are those customers that have sold fewer than 20, that have purchased 20% fewer widgets in the last quarter? That's where I can then have that chat and that interaction where there's questions I know in my mind I want answered, but might not be presented clearly and concisely on that dashboard or within that data warehouse, right? So that's where we can step in and use generative AI, as a storyteller, where I can have a conversation, get my questions answered. So again, this data warehouse kind of piece that I was talking about, again, it's a massive set of tables, which I think is great from a technology perspective. We can store our data, we can update our data, we can keep our data secure. But if I'm an end user, if I'm a business user, if I'm a CEO, CFO on a call, that's completely foreign to me, just because again, the SQL comment I made earlier, I'm not going to jump in and query against that database. But then again, what we're helping our clients with here is, how are we layering generative AI on top of our data warehouse that I can go in, understand what tables are available to me? What do those tables represent? what dashboards are available to me. I want to talk with this dashboard and have a conversation, right? So again, it's using existing technology, but then leveraging generative AI on top of that. So to kind of close out, I think this, business analytics, very broad. But again, I get back to how are we using our data within our organizations to be more strategic, to achieve organizational goals, to achieve sales numbers, whatever that is, and then measuring against that. So a couple things here that I want to call out is that being adaptive, right? Getting back to these, the data story or the data project that Jess was talking about earlier. It's how do we start small rather than grabbing all of the data? Let's focus on a specific business unit that is clamoring for insight. Okay, what do they want to measure? And then working that back to what data sources do we have available to us? Starting small. This collaboration, kind of what we've been talking about through here is how do we better collaborate with the data made available to us? And that's where we're seeing a lot of success and a lot of opportunity with generative artificial intelligence, that I can now collaborate with my data rather than just being reactionary and looking at a dashboard. I can now work with our data and have that conversation with somebody like a generative AI solution that knows infinitely more than I kind of ever will, because I have a day-to-day, I have other things going on, rather than just my task of analyzing this information. And then this last one is it's this control piece where, we've talked about this, where it starts small, build incremental. I think, kind of talking back to that starting small comment, finding those quick wins, right? I have a similar project going on where it's an architecture, but it's also layering in generative artificial intelligence. And it's how do we start small, go get a win we know we can win, and then build out from there and build the organizational awareness where, hey, here's what this group is doing with this new technology. Here's how we can apply it to yours, right? And just let it naturally progress. So with that said, Amy, I will pass it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Casey and Jessica, for your time and information today. To our audience, if you have questions or comments, please reach out. You can drop a note in the Q&A window now or reach out to our presenters directly. Their contact information is in your console as well as in the slide deck, which you can download now from the handouts window. And then the next session in our AI webcast series will be on August 12th, where Casey and Jessica will go over how to choose the right AI solution that aligns with your business strategy. There is a link in your console that will take you to more details. And finally, here's a link to a survey for today's presentation. Your feedback is always appreciated. And again, thank you for joining us, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.